We're speaking with the University of Adelaide's Professor Bronwyn Gillanders. She's a researcher with the School of Biological Sciences and the Environment Institute. Bronwyn, a bit of concern around what's being sold at fish and chip shops that you're raising today.
Yeah, so we found when we sampled flake, which is traditionally used as an umbrella term for a whole range of shark species, that there were a number of endangered species included in the samples.
That's quite incredible just to think that. I won't name the fish and chip shop, I had some flake recently and I think, wow, I'm horrified to think I might have been eating an endangered species.
Well, it's an umbrella term, flake, and so according to the Australian fish names or the fish name standard, it's recommended that only gummy shark, which is a sustainable fishery, should be using that term along with New Zealand rig, but it tends to be used for anything that's shark.
Well, when it comes to your research, I guess, first of all, how did you do this sampling? Are you able to sort of broadly say what the geographic range was of where you sampled? We broadcast across a whole range of coastal areas in regional Australia.
Yeah, so basically through mostly focused on the Adelaide metropolitan region, but also out into some of the more regional areas. We basically went into fish and chip shops and ordered fish and chips, paid for them, and then took a sample of the fish or the shark and used that for DNA testing, and that's how we were able to figure out which species it was.
And how does it happen? Like, how do we end up with this happening where you've got species that aren't... I mean, is there regulation around this? Or is it just a grey area about whether it's regulated, what you should or shouldn't be putting in fish and chip shop?
So probably what ends up happening is people catch them. Like if you think about your listeners going out fishing, they can't necessarily target the species that they want. And if they end up with a shark that's dead, they probably take it into the markets and sell it on. But you've also got to remember that once some of these sharks are processed, it's extremely difficult to figure out what species it is without undertaking something like the genetic testing that we did. So if I got given a shark fillet, I doubt whether I would be able to tell you what species it was from. So there's this tendency, or there's this risk, I guess, that things could be mislabelled.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of a challenge at the fishing end of identifying what should or shouldn't be caught. What were some of the endangered species that were detected in your DNA sampling? Yeah,
so we found short-fin mako shark and also the smooth hammerhead shark, and both of those are listed on the convention, or it's called the CITES list. It's the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species, and you're not actually meant to be trading them. But we also found imported product as well. So if you think your fish and chips might be local, it's worth just checking that if you're wanting to consume local caught fish, that it is actually local caught rather than imported product.
How do you detect that? Is that from the DNA sample? You can identify the origin, or is it because of the type of species tells you that it wasn't from local waters?
So in our case, it's the species that we detected and not found in Australian waters, but you can also use a similar approach to check potentially the provenance, so where they were caught, depending on what you know about the genetics, or using other approaches.
Now, I guess, so we're not accused of having a dig at fish and chip retailers themselves. Are they themselves able to tell, or is it really something that is a problem further up the chain when the fish are being caught?
So it could be anywhere in the supply chain. So I suspect that most fish and chip shops buy flake and think it's already probably filleted as opposed to a whole shark, so they wouldn't really know exactly what it could be. So we're not suggesting it's a fish and chip shop. It could be anywhere along the supply chain.
And so how, are there regulatory approaches that have been taken here or overseas, or has it really come down to, I guess, policing and prosecuting the fishing of endangered species out on the waters?
So we have what's called the Australian Fish Name Standard, and the term flakes are only meant to be used to describe gummy shark, which is a sustainable fishery, and New Zealand rig, but the guidelines are not mandatory, whereas in the European Union it's mandatory to indicate what species it is, where it was caught, what processing it's undertaken. So our consumers really could be pushing for mandatory names or standards around naming of products.
All right. Well, it does raise some awareness, I guess, and maybe people could probably do some asking at a retailer what they're getting. But I guess then, as you say, there's probably a limited amount of retailers can actually tell for sure where their flake actually came from.
That's correct. It's also worth pointing out that it's not just seafood that falls into this mislabelling area. A few years ago, or a number of years ago, there was an issue around bread being sold through one of the supermarkets where they were saying it was locally produced and most of it was coming from virtually cooked to the end, but from Ireland. So it's not just seafood. It can happen to oils, to bread, to salt, to a whole range of products.
I guess that comes back to the changes that happened to the Australian labelling laws. I think it was in the last decade, and now you get it at the supermarket. You can look and you can see, the percentage that was produced in Australia. But I'm gathering this doesn't apply when it comes to sort of fresh sold meat.
Yeah, so when it comes to fish and seafood, there are only guidelines around the naming standards, and there's loads of different names for the same product.
All right. Well, look, we appreciate the research that's been done there. It's a bit hard to know where things can go from here, but I'm sure the publicity you've had around it's probably given some governments cause to think about what they could do. Bronwyn Gillanders from Adelaide Uni, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you.